I will say this before we jump into the numbers. It takes about a year to get new numbers. So all of these numbers, consider this a pre-COVID foundation. All these numbers are probably going to be minuscule in comparison to what we're going to see in our new reality of how people are spending their lives now. So to get started, when we look at how much time people actually spend online, the average person, now this is across all generations, spends over 5 years on social media alone. It's just 5 years. That's crazy. But when we look more specifically at the younger generation, it's even greater because young people can actually spend 9 to 18 hours a day behind a screen. And that is certainly probably increased across all generations. It is clear that, especially with young people, their time behind the screen is limited by the fact that they require sleep. And if they can shower and be online, they've probably figured it out. So when we look at also how our time spent online and how we socialize compared to how we socialize in person, things have changed dramatically. When I was a child, it was very common just to show up at people's house, and it was exciting if someone stopped by. People don't do that anymore, especially with COVID. We actually spend 3 times as much time on social media as we do spend socializing in person. We spend more time texting each other, more time, chatting with each other, sharing posts, tagging each other, engaging in digital spaces with each other than we do in person. And the interesting thing is we have this roadblock in our mind that somehow digital tools and technologies are separate from our faith and are separate from our real life, but it's all one experience. It's all one faith experience. And we'll talk about how we can break down that silo and really use the digital space for this purpose. When we looked at how many people are actually attending church, we have 9+ hours a day to connect with 80% of people who are not actually attending church. Only about 20% of professed Christians regularly attend church. So we have to ask, how do we reach that 80%? Well, as I just said, we have over 9 hours a day to connect with people online. And this is where, we talk about a biblical concept is meeting people where they are, not where we want them to be. People are online. It's easier to connect online. It's easier to talk online than it is to meet in person. And this was true even before COVID. And so we can actually use these tools and technologies to better understand people's needs, understand their behavior, and to create programs and services that actually meet them where they are. So this means kind of putting some of our assumptions aside. Now, there is a great need for our message. I am not exaggerating when I say that people are literally Googling for God. Many people are hurting. They're entertaining suicidal thoughts, or they feel that there's no hope for their situation. Every year, there are millions of Google searches for answers to questions like, is God real? What happens when we die? How do I know I'm saved? Why is there so much suffering in the world? And I would add things like, why is God absent? Why does God feel absent? Where is God in times of crisis? And you know who's not answering? It's us. So people go online, they search for answers to these questions, and we are not present in a real and relevant way. People are turning to the internet for companionship, for understanding, information, anonymity, and more. It's easier for us to pour our hearts out online to a stranger than it is to come to a friend, a neighbor, coworker, or family member because of the fear of judgment. So there's a lot of opportunity here. We should be the voice that answers back. People should be able to find answers to these questions from a Christian and from an Adventist perspective. We have powerful truths that never before have people needed so badly as they need right now. They are stuck at home, and many of them are suffering from, basically desperation. Different illnesses of desperation, whether that's mental illness, whether that's drug addiction, whatever it is, or just loneliness and isolation. We have an opportunity to be the voice that answers back and gives them hope and gives them wholeness. But right now, mostly when people search church online, what do they find? They watch people in a building, and now it's an empty building. So they just, get to see a pastor behind a podium. And the reality is people searching for answers need more than a program to watch. They need more than just watching people in a building. They need a community. They need engagement back and forth. They need someone who can answer their questions, who can pray for them, who can just sometimes just listen to them, whatever their felt need is. We know that at any given point in time, and again, I will stress that this statistic was taken before COVID, that a quarter of people in the United States and Canada and North America are in crisis at any given moment. Crisis can be defined as divorce, loss of job, illness, depression, whatever it is. At least a quarter of people at any given time are in crisis. And right now with COVID, it's probably at least half of people. But who is there when they're searching for those questions? Who is there to help them out spiritually? See, I truly believe in order for the church to be relevant, we need to be present in the spaces where people are spending their times and meeting them where they are with the questions they're asking and the needs that they have in that moment. Moving on, there's two main categories that people search alone. And those two categories are actually religion and pornography. I can tell you that personally, my spiritual journey started very privately. For me, it was very private, and for many, this is very private. And they're both of these topics, so they seem very different, are actually related to relationship and connection. And so we have an opportunity to steer people in a healthy direction. People who are often too scared or too ashamed or too uncertain to share their spiritual journey or where they are with others. They're searching online and they're searching alone. So again, what can we do to fill this void? So one of the things I like to talk about is this idea of bridging the gap, because not everyone is ready to come into a church. And, some are not even really ready to discuss their issues with someone in person. They might only be able to direct a message. They might only be able to text. And some people may never be able to come through the church doors, due to, personal disability, due to other issues. It might just be because of location. But we have an opportunity to engage with people. We know more than that. Millions of people visit our churches and our ministry websites a year. And how many more, countless, engage with us on social media. But are we prepared to communicate back with them? We know, especially when we look at younger generations, they prefer digital communications. But more often than not, when I log on to ministry accounts and ministry websites and I check their inbox and I check, their direct messages, there are dozens of messages there that have gone unanswered for years. Some of them as simple as, what do I wear to church? Or is there parking? Or is my child welcome to come? Barriers to entry that if someone would have just responded, they could have come to church. Others are more heartbreaking. I remember one time I logged into a ministry and there was a woman there saying that her son had died and that she was really struggling. No one responded to her. And by the time I read the message, like over a year had passed by. So it no longer have made sense to reach out. So we have to be prepared. We have to understand that the culture has changed and that this may be the preferred form of communication for many people, but we can build bridges. A fourth of the world's population is on Facebook alone. All continents are represented. 77% of Americans are on some type of social media. We are called to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. We have ability to reach all nations. We as the Seventh-day Adventist Church are the most ethnically diverse church in North America. If we become these reach vehicles for souls, if we become, content creators and distributors and engagers, we have the ability to reach around the world because we are such a diverse, such a connected community. But all we have to do is actually to do it. And what many people often don't realize just how simple it really is. I mean, many of us feel like we can't participate in ministry, or we can't participate in, evangelism, or we're not good at discipling, or whatever it is. If we have influence, if we are on social media, we have influence, and what we do with that matters. And that's what we're going to unpack in detail in this series of how we can use this. Because after all, this is a model for everyday ministry to people, and it was demonstrated by Jesus Christ. Oftentimes we can hear this. Like, oh, modern technologies, we don't need a new gospel, we don't need a new message, we have the Bible. I agree. This is actually a model that was set forth by Jesus, and we're just using digital tools and technologies to follow Jesus. And what did Jesus do? He shared stories, he shared wisdom, he attended to people's needs physically, spiritually, mentally. He answered their questions, he shared hope, he gave them community, he created community, he developed an engaged, active church body, he led them to wholeness, and equipped them to be disciples and to replicate the model. This is how we can use modern tools and technologies. It doesn't mean gravitating away from the biblical model. So, what is the digital discipleship and evangelism model? It's actually surprisingly simple. It's created of three roles. You have content creators, or the creative. These are the people who are creating or packaging content, packaging this wisdom and this information, from the Bible, from, obviously the direct source being God. And then you have the distributors. These are the people that are pushing it out, who are engaging in something I call digital door knocking. And then you have the engagers. These are your front lines people who are having those conversations with people, praying with them, meeting their needs, getting to understand them, building those meaningful relationships. And the reason I put in a two-way arrow here is that there's overlap. Many of you might have members of your congregation who actually can fit in multiple different roles. Every member of your congregation who has a cell phone, who has an email address, who is on social media, can be a distributor. They might not all be able to create content, and they might not all be able to feel comfortable engaging. But the very lowest, barrier, the very lowest entry level in digital discipleship and evangelism is they can simply distribute. And we'll unpack that in depth, I think, in the fourth part of our series. But as the Adventist Church, we should be on the cutting edge of teaching and preaching present truth. We have millions of members in North America alone. So what if every church became a digital content creator? So, we're talking about the sermons, we're talking about your Bible studies, your blog posts, your images and your quotes, and all the stuff you're already creating throughout the year. Sorry, I saw something from the chat, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't like a warning, like you've been disconnected. We as a church body, with the churches acting as content creators, the members can act as distributors and engagers. We as a church body could work together as content creators, engagers, and distributors to generate a mighty voice, that loud voice for sharing the gospel message. There is so much untapped potential in our local churches and the individual. We could overwhelm social media, this digital mission field, if you will, with truth, with messages of hope and wholeness. But in order to catch up, we must prioritize technology at all levels of the church structure. We must become as effective as secular organizations in getting our message out and reaching our target audiences. I believe that, while God doesn't do bad things, he doesn't cause the bad in the world. I believe he uses it. I believe he's using COVID to teach us to do church, to do mission work without the building, to be able to extend the worship experience beyond the confines of time and space in the building to an actively engaged church that is ministering to people 24/7. So just like the apostolic church, who took the gospel to new regions of the world because they were fleeing persecution, so too today We must take the gospel to the digital mission field. And the cool part is we don't even have to leave our couch. So now sometimes I get people who ask me, yes, but can you really make global impact? And even with COVID, even with everything that's going on, the people are still, skeptical. And I get that. It's something new. It's something it feels very different from what we've already been doing. But I contend that it's not. But that question always reminds me of one of my first campaigns for the Adventist Church. So in the summer of 2016, I worked with a mission that is your best pathway to health. And my job was to create community awareness for the free mega health clinic that they were doing in Beckley, West Virginia, which is in the heart of Appalachia, for those of you who don't know. I got a call from a friend who had found out in the trainings that I was actually doing some promotions. So we were doing the traditional promotions. We were doing the flyers and everything else that typically goes along with these events. But I was charged with a small budget to actually create awareness online. And so I was doing just like paid ads and just promotions and sharing and doing partnerships and stuff like that online. Well, I got a call from someone who was very, very upset about that. And she felt I was wasting the tithe dollar. I was only spending like $220, and that I was completely disconnected from this community because, of course, this community isn't connected online. Like many of these people don't have electricity. They don't have running water. Who do I think I am that I could reach, people in this area, using social media? She felt that I was completely disconnected, that, I was in DC in an ivory tower, completely unaware of the situation of the people I was actually trying to reach. And so I listened because for me, it was, it was a learning moment to see what I was up against because I was new for working for the church, but it was also a teaching moment. Because what she didn't know about me is that I'm actually from an area that's, quite similar. And when she was done airing her grievances, I asked her one simple question, and that is, do you know someone who is not on social media? And she said, well, yes, of course. And so I followed her up with another question that was like, well, if you saw an online advertisement about a free medical treatment with no strings attached, and you knew they needed help, would you tell them? Because what I was thinking was, what happens in the digital space is not confined to the digital space. Because what I was doing, and I explained this to her because we were friends, and I respected her because she was older. And what I explained to her is, I was making a strategic decision to activate the sharing power of the population within 50 miles of Beckley, West Virginia, that was online. Because I could go online and I could see that there were 200,000 people on Facebook alone within 50 miles of Beckley, West Virginia. Now, the fact that they were online and they had a Facebook account probably meant that they were in a better situation than the person, who doesn't have running water, who doesn't have electricity, and certainly doesn't have a smartphone. But what I did was I decided to activate the sharing power of those 200,000 people who were online, because I knew that they did not live in a silo. I knew that they were most likely connected to the other community members who were not on social media. And so we ran the campaign, and of course I was nervous, and there's a lot of prayer involved. But when we did the exit surveys, social media outperformed all the traditional advertising, and was second only to referral or a family member. And based on those anecdotal testimonies, word of mouth, friend of family was largely driven by social media and those related digital campaigns. Because what we found is that the grandchild or the daughter or the neighbor saw the promotion and went and shared the good news of the opportunity with the person that they cared about in the community. And so this is how we can have global impact, because what starts in the digital space is not confined to the digital space. And again, this is, this ties into why most people actually even share content online. So we know that at least 94% of people share content online because they feel the content will improve the lives of others. My friends, the church should be in the business of creating content that improves the lives of others. We should have the most shareable content out there. And just like the example of what I just shared with you in Beckley, West Virginia, the act of sharing a good thing goes beyond the digital space. So our challenge, if we want to have global impact, if we want to reach the unreached, is to reach those online and activate their online and offline sharing power of those we connect with, because people don't live in silos. My life online, my relationships and my conversations online, and the things I talk about and share with my friends through digital tools and technologies is not separate from the conversations I have with them in person. And so we want to dig deeper and see how there's actually a biblical model for this. When we look at what Paul did in Acts at the school of Tyrannus, in the city of Ephesus. Now, Ephesus was an important port for trade and commerce, like the internet. It attracted people from all over the Roman Empire. It was actually, we don't tend to think of the ancient world as diverse, but it actually was quite diverse. People would come and hear what he had to say at the school, go home and tell others what they'd learned. In short, they would hit like, they would share on social media, which in their case was actually physically word of mouth, and their friends and families were exposed to Paul's teachings of the gospel. Social media has the potential to do this on a much larger scale. We live in a world of intersecting cultures and communities, and the school of Tyrannus sounds like social media to me. It was where people went to share new ideas, to pass the time, to share their thoughts and participate in discussions. This is no different than what we're dealing with today, except what we do today is on a much grander scale. This is the foundation for the digital discipleship and evangelism model. And so he was able to stay in one place and his teachings spread. So now the city of Ephesus experience is now reflected in every major city in the world and online. So when we reach those who have, migrated to the digitally connected parts of the world, we can reach the rest of the world. So evangelism experts always tell me that the best way to reach a community or people group is to empower a member of that group or that community. We can reach people online who have maintained their ties to their home communities in some way. It might shock you, but where I come from, cell phone reception is still not a thing. And so, but I'm still connected to my parents. They have a satellite phone. But we maintain these ties no matter where we move to. We still have our home family. We still have the people we're connected to and we love. And so we can reach those people who still maintain ties to their communities around the world. They're from that community and they're in the best position to share the gospel within those cultural norms, language, and expectations of those communities. Now, in a later presentation, we're going to talk about understanding your audience, and we're going to dig into, sort of cultural empathy in the digital mission field. But the point here is that when the people we can reach visit their friends and family, they can share the gospel, much like the ancient citizens of the Roman Empire did back in the 1st century. Or they can share on social media and translate into their own language. We know that the 42% of the world on social media most likely knows the other 58% of the world not connected. And so that is sort of the foundation of this model. This is really what we're going for, because this is how we can obtain global impact. Not only is the mission field right here in North America, but if we reach North America, we can reach the world, because we can obtain global impact through digital communications, leveraging the same strategy Paul used, but scaled up by modern technology. And I don't know about you, but that gets me very excited indeed. So now I'm just going to go into a little bit of, how we should think about the seeker's journey. Now, for those of you who might have a background in communications, or you're older and so you know the traditional evangelistic methods or the traditional marketing messages, marketing is really just evangelism. A traditional path might look something like what you currently see on the screen. It's basically a linear path. It worked for a long time, but to reach younger generations, we must take an integrated approach that understands the complexities of modern life and relationships. People don't fit into boxes anymore. Like if you compare me with my grandparents, and we'll go through this in a later presentation, you cannot market to me the same way you used to be able to market, because people fit into these groups where everybody worked the same job, everybody worshiped the same, everybody basically ate the same, lived the same in these close-knit little communities. So if you wanted to reach a particular group of people, you could market to them in a one-size-fits-all. That doesn't work anymore, and life has gotten much more complicated. So what does this mean? Traditional model is not dead. Nothing I'm talking about is replacing our traditional means, but it's about building upon it. It's about scaling it up. Many of these steps are still in play, but we have more resources to reach and interact with people that are relevant to their situation. So we can take a more customized approach, and with modern sensibilities, that's what's expected. So it's a way to amplify our communications and provide for people 7 days a week, 24/7. So in other words, we combine traditional, those steps, but with digital strategies, and allows us to fish 24/7 in a much larger pond. And so ultimately, we need to remember that the church is not a program to watch. It's not a building on the street. It's a people to be. The kingdom of God is 24/7, online and offline, and his church should be the same. We have the ability to extend the worship experience, to extend the community experience, to extend the faith experience beyond the confines of time and space in a building. Church should be every day of the week. Service should be every day of the week. Reaching people and ministering to them should be every day a week. Instead of counting success by bodies in a building, which for many of us is not possible because the churches may still be closed or many people don't feel comfortable coming in the building, but we need to count success by whether or not we are building a kingdom. Now, here's another way to look at the modern experience. And again, this is a marketing concept. I'm going to share this presentation with the team here. And so I believe they'll probably post it on a website or make it available somewhere so you can download it. So you can take a screenshot and study this if you'd like, but just know that the presentation will be made available. So we can understand sort of the modern seeker's journey as a process of a funnel. And this is where every person is kind of funneled down to a goal, which traditionally was to become a member. Now, people can actually enter and engage at different levels of the funnel in multiple ways. It's not as confined as sort of that linear model, but this is the basic principle. Every transition, involves an ask or implied, something implied movement to the next step, but there's also this explicit, some people leave. That's why the funnel gets more narrow. With every person has the option of moving down or forward in the chain, living at a stage, or moving out. So what this means is, as we're thinking about how to funnel people through their spiritual journey, or to funnel them through so that they become involved in our faith community, whether that's online or in person, is we have to think about how we can make it easy for people to move to the next step, to take that action and lead in a way that is a no-brainer for them to go to the next stage. So ultimately, the goal is for members to become active disciples who then can become part of the funnel mechanism as those content creators, distributors, or engagers. Which is why the funnel, if you notice at the bottom, it kind of fans back out and loops back around. And the foundation, of course, is this integrative strategy, where integrative just means combining traditional with digital to amplify our effort. So this is another way that you can think about it. Study this out, study this funnel out, and think about, when you're doing evangelistic series or when you're doing outreach into the community, how are you How are you, creating those different levels of the funnel? Do you have exposure and awareness? Is there a broad awareness of your ministries and your services? How do people discover you? And you can go on down through the loops. Now, the last way to understand the seeker's journey, and we'll discuss this before going to a short break, is we think about our modern world as an intersection between analog and digital experiences, and these are called journeys loops. So this is actually a causal loop method of looking at complex situations. You don't have to necessarily go in order. So when you look at this is sort of the outline. When you can think about either the funnel or the linear model before, you have the C, awareness, you have the think, consideration, you have do, meaning you visit or engage or maybe opt into a newsletter or something, care, relationship, meaning they start forming those relationships that ultimately help people stay in the church and they become a member and an actively engaged member. But let's insert the loops and sort of the additional complexities of the situation. So when people are first become aware, they start to think and they consider, and there's sort of this research and discovery loop. And I, for one, actually started in the think loop. And then I skipped do. So I converted to Adventism from atheism almost 20 years ago now. But I started in the research and discovery loop. And then I built relationships with people who were in the church. And that's actually what eventually moved me back out from think, consideration to do. And then I became a member. And when I became a member, I, got involved in ministry and discipleship. So causal loops are not a perfect, representation, but they help visualize what is actually happening in a complex system or journey, because our faith journeys are complex. Sometimes we get stuck in a loop, sometimes we get stuck at a stage, sometimes we digress, sometimes we skip and move around, but it's a complex system. And so these distinct elements that are interrelated and organized to achieve a common purpose or goal. So in today's world, people are turning to the internet for answers. So actually, the first two parts of the journey are primarily done in the digital space. So when I think about my own personal journey, I became aware of faith in a very real way because initially God actually intervened in my life, and that's a side story. But the way I started to actually become more aware was through searching online. And this was back with when you popped in a CD. So I was an early adopter. And thinking consideration. That happened to me almost exclusively online. That is where I did my research. That is where I eventually became convicted enough to do or engage in person. Now, that next step, that do, that visit, that engage, that can happen in person or in the digital space. So they can come into the church service, they can come to a church event, they can come to an event where you're serving the community, whatever it is, whatever that action is, or they can sign up for materials online, they can sign up for a digital Bible study, they can subscribe to an email list or a video series. Either way is valid. Now, ideally, the last part of the journey is that building relationship, those personal connections and getting involved. Ideally, that happens in, the physical space, but it's time for us to recognize that it's just as relevant in the digital space. There are so many times I hear from digital missionaries where they're reaching people in parts of the world where we could never go preach in person. They're reaching people in, predominantly Muslim countries where that person can never go to a Christian church. There's just not a Christian church around. And so their relationships that they're building online and their involvement as, an online member and, in ministry or discipleship, that is just as valid. So, based on a person's situation, it's going to be different. It's going to be unique. But this is one way to really consider what a seeker is going through. And remember, our spiritual journeys don't happen in a silo. I don't view my spiritual journey from, the research I did online as separate from what I've experienced in person. It is all one arc. And for too long, we as a church have separated the two, when we should actually be embracing these technologies. We should be actively sharing our faith and our messages in the digital space, because from the seeker's perspective, it's all one journey, and we need to be present where they're spending their time. And so we need to seek to find ways to extend the church experience online. So with that, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then when we get back, we're going to talk a little bit more about what digital discipleship is, who's involved, what the tools are, and the importance of digital curb appeal.
Stay 6 feet or more from others. Follow state and local guidelines. Wash our hands frequently. Stay home when we feel sick. For ourselves, for our loved ones, for the common future. Let's move forward together. Learn more at coronavirus.gov.
The Amazon Echo Dot is a hands-free voice control device that uses far-field voice recognition for voice-activated digital assistants. The North American Division Adult Ministries Department, with the aid of very talented Alexa programmers, has developed an Alexa skill for the Adult Bible Study Guide. This resource for the Echo Dot is in response to today's demanding, fast-paced society, delivering on-demand audio sharing and the daily Adult Bible Study Guide. As the program develops, there will be more commands and features programmed into the Adult Bible Study Guide Alexa skill. The North American Division of Adult Ministries Department is proud to present this innovative tool for Bible study. This skill is now available in the Alexa Skill Catalog on Amazon.com.
All right, well, now we're going to dig into the next part of our presentation. And many people ask, well, what is digital discipleship and evangelism? Simply put, I want you to think of it as a way to build relationship, to meet the needs of your community, and advance the gospel message in the digital space around a digital need or by utilizing a digital tool. It's basically serving others, improving the well-being of others, and sharing the gospel. But what are digital tools? And I don't want to make any assumptions, so we're just going to cover this quickly to make sure everybody's on the same page. Digital tools include things like social media, your email, website, blogs, podcasts, digital advertising tools, messaging tools like WhatsApp, even texting, using your smartphone, even reviews, meeting tools like Zoom. You can host Bible studies and all kinds of cool stuff that way. Cameras, apps, and search engine optimization. And we'll touch on different aspects of this throughout the series, but you get an idea of what I mean by digital tools. This is all encompassing. So the great thing about digital tools and technologies, particularly social media, is that it allows us to not only go global, but to better penetrate our local communities with our mission. When we think of missionaries, we tend to think of traveling to faraway lands. But let's be honest, our struggle in North America is actually reaching our neighbors. The mission field is right next door, and it's just as legitimate. So what social media allows us to do is to get to know the needs of our community, to get to understand the needs of those we're connected to. We can let people know they're heard, they understand. We can connect with our neighbors. We can better build relationships. So instead of just seeing people once a week or whenever there's a community service, we can continue building those relationships every day of the week. And we can let them know that we're here to help, so that we're not just the building of the street. We're not just, in this case, maybe with modern times, it might be the empty building of the street. But we are a center for positive influence within our communities. Because the old adage, it might seem trite, but it's true, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So the potential of digital evangelism and discipleship must be realized at the local church level. A top-down approach cannot meet the needs of your neighbors, but you can. The apostolic church began as a grassroots movement, and we still need to maintain that mentality to connect with meaningful ways with local communities. Too often, we as individual members kind of abdicate our personal responsibilities to, whether it's the pastor or the personal ministries team or the conference or the union or the division, when we're actually all called to participate in this work. Because the power of the local church is in its ability to create meaningful relationships. Social media and these digital tools are just a tool that we can use to scale up these efforts while becoming more targeted in our approach based on the needs and behaviors of our audience, based on the needs of the people that we are building relationships, that we're talking to, that we're engaging with, that we're checking up on. I believe that the next great awakening will be a digital one, but we must be intentional. We must work together. So the most meaningful expression of our mission of hope and wholeness is in the context of the local church, because that is where direct impact can be made. Now, with that in mind, we have to talk about something that is called digital curb appeal, because first impressions actually matter. And the methods by which we minister to people and share the gospel are becoming more complex, because now we have the analog world and we have the digital world. But honestly, human nature, needs, and behavior largely stay the same. So one of these analog ideas that I borrowed and translated to the digital mission field is this idea of curb appeal, right? So long before the internet and 360 video, real estate agents and pastors would actually focus their attention on finding ways to optimize something that we called curb appeal. So if someone was interested in buying a house, the realtor would fix up the outside, make it look really nice, so that if people drove by, they would then be more likely to call and to book an appointment. This is still important today, but now we have this need of digital curb appeal, because nearly almost 100%, 97% of people search online for local organizations. Nearly half of people say a church's website is important in picking a church to visit. And for many people, 33% of people is where they initially learned about their church. And, I would love to see if they can pull a number on how many people initially learned about their faith online, because I would fall into that group. So the question you should ask yourself, whether it's a ministry, whether you're part of a church, whatever it is, what do people find when they Google you? When they Google your church? Is the content up to date? Is new visitor information easy to find? What are those barriers to entry? What are those questions they might be asking that if they don't have an answer for, they're not going to come, or they're not going to participate, or they're not going to watch online? Are there pictures, testimonies, and stories that reflect your church community and are inviting to others? Is it clear what services and opportunities your church provides? So too often there was, I think it was a Babylonian Bee article that they post every once in a while, and the article is, guy is really excited about picnic from like 2010 that's still on your church's website. Like, make sure things are up to date, make sure opportunities are present and modern, so that people can trust the information, are more likely to come. So when we looked at a recent gray matter research study, we found that in the last 12 months, and it's probably, again, increased because all the numbers are different now with COVID, over 17 million American adults who don't regularly attend church services visited the website of a local church or a place of worship. So in other words, many people are going to find your website long before they physically enter a place of worship. So, and in many cases, your church presence, your digital presence, whether that's on social media, whether it's your website, whether it's on YouTube, will be their first introduction to your church and possibly the faith as a whole. We have a large portion of our population that is completely unchurched. So what do they think when they find your content? What is their impression? To really put yourself in a seeker's shoes, think empathetically, think about what their questions could be, what their barriers to entry are. If you notice on a lot of these slides, I have short links down below. This is an article that digs a little bit deeper into that. So if you really want to learn about digital curb appeal and get a checklist for the things that you can make sure you have covered, go to that link down in the bottom right-hand corner. So just some quick tips. Again, you want to go deeper, go to that link, but you want to make sure it's up to date, it's mobile friendly. So Google actually prefers mobile friendly websites and will rank them better. So I actually completely revamped my home church's website. And prior to COVID, we had people coming in every week who found us online and liked our website and were coming in. And so it really does matter because we live here in the DC metropolitan area. I think there's like 80 Adventist churches. So for us to rank one, if people search churches near them, it really is quite an accomplishment. So you want to think evergreen, you want to think content that isn't going to be dated. You want a simple, organized, easy to navigate layout. You want to make sure everything's up to date, accurate. Remove those barriers to entry. A very common barrier to entry is actually what to wear. So it's really advisable that you have an FAQ and that you cover all those basic questions. You want to write for your visitors, tell your story, reveal your culture, reflect Christ, share what you believe. People don't like bait and switch. They want to know up front where you stand. And you can certainly showcase opportunities for more dynamic content. I recommend using social media because generally members don't go to your website. It's really for the outsider who's considering coming or participating in your community, whether that's online or in the digital space. Now remember, your digital presence is an extension of your church brand and voice in the online world. In a later presentation, we'll go into branding, but this is just a broad observation. Your brand is how your church is perceived. The love of God should be on display in your digital communications and presence. So to learn more about branding, you can of course go to that link. So in this next short section, we're going to talk about, who makes up the digital discipleship team? We know that it has three roles. You have the content creators, you have the distributors, and you have the engagers. But not to be cheesy, simply put, everyone is part of the digital discipleship team. And this is because our digital tools are meant to extend our traditional efforts at the local church while being more targeted in our approach. It is a tool to scale up traditional evangelism, not replace it. So this means that we're not excluding anybody from this model because we use an integrated model. And an integrated model is one that utilizes all of our tools, analog and digital, in a holistic approach that serves to reach people every way possible and to consider all our touch points. Now, what does this mean practically, you might be asking? What it means is it's not digital versus traditional, but rather a church using all of its human resources and available tools to work together for a common goal. So when we looked at church growth, so that little Venn diagram in the bottom right, we see that church growth is a product of promotion, experience, and personal connections. So it's one thing to get people into your church. It's another thing to get them to come back. So they must not only have a good experience, but they must connect with members on a personal level. Church is about creating that community of believers. And so that means creating meaningful connections online and with those who enter our house of worship. So your online interaction should make people want to experience your faith, your mission in person, and vice versa. And so when they come for that on-site experience, it should be a continuation of that positive relationship you've built with them online. So the good news is the 84-year-old greeter at the door is part of your digital discipleship team just as much as the tech-savvy youths who create video snippets and content for social media. Because there's a woman at my church, she's not online, she's awesome, but she's the warm person who welcomes me every time in church. Because the reason I go to church in person is for those personal connections. And so no matter how our world has changed, no matter how digital we become, we still need those relationships. And so when we talk about this model, it is a holistic model. It's a holistic model that looks at every touch point. And again, you can download this presentation. You can study all these touch points, or this is also available in the book. There is a lot of overlapping functions, and most people don't interact with your faith community or church in just one ways. So you want to think about where your experience breaks down, all the different ways you interact with people, and how you want to be known. Part of this means making room for digital discipleship and evangelism. So for too long, the church has not done a good job of valuing the tech savvy and the creatives. So we know the spiritual gifts of hospitality, of teaching, of preaching, and prophecy, and all of that. But we need to empower and recognize talented young people to form teams of content creators, distributors, engagers. Most of us probably have members of our congregation who could specialize in certain areas. These can be powerful ministry opportunities, personal ministry opportunities, especially for those really empathetic people. We all know those people that know everybody and connect with everybody. Empower that person to use that skill set, that talent, for ministering to others and connecting the church family closer together. We also have people who are really good at facilitating those online conversations with people. We can create a culture of sharing and engaging in the church content as a means for individuals to help the church's mission and expand the reach of our messages. Because anybody who is on social media can share your content. So if you are online, you have influence, and what you do with that influence matters. We can strengthen our church body. We can improve cross-generational relationships through mentoring and training, and that can go mentoring down to the younger generations, empowering them to use their talents in creative ways, but it's also mentoring up, and you're teaching older generations how to use these technologies and to use them for the gospel. There's a lot of potential here, and the church should sort of exemplify what mentorship really means in action. And so we can create these opportunities, create a culture. We can utilize and empower those influencers, those social butterflies, and of course, setting up training sessions with your members and various people in different areas. You can leverage the social influence of your congregation. You probably have many subgroups within your congregation. You can kind of think about them and what their various skill levels are. Because like I said before, it doesn't matter if people have 4 friends or 40,000. They have influence. And so each impression message received represents a person touched by our message and mission. So you have these subgroups in your congregation. Think about how they can fit into this model and how their influence can be leveraged for this very important work. If you are lucky enough to have a Bible worker at your church, it's no longer necessarily culturally appropriate to knock on doors. So I encourage you, I implore you, please empower them to expand their efforts digitally. They can use social media and other technologies as lead generating tools. Because remember, Bible workers tend to, focus on younger generation. Young people spend 9 to 18 hours a day behind a screen. That affords the church a lot of opportunity to reach them with relevant content and to facilitate those conversations. So ideally, this Bible worker is someone who can ultimately lead a focused evangelistic effort. So it might be also a digital pastor or a youth pastor you have, train others, build a dedicated team, and work with other groups and initiatives within the church. Basically, empower them to use digital tools and technologies to reach people within your community and to facilitate Bible studies, connections, all of that. All right. So the last topic we will cover before going to, I think, a quick commercial break and then Q&A is this idea of a strong foundation. Now, in a later session, we're going to go into this in depth, but if you want to get a sneak peek, you can visit that link. But I wanted to touch on this topic here before we go into the next 3 sessions where we dig deep into the roles, because I get a lot of comments or I hear from people that they get a lot of criticism because people think Jesus is our rock and not worldly marketing best practices. That is not wrong, of course. Jesus is our rock. He is our foundation. Everything we do should be built upon the examples that he set for us. Everything we do should be for his glory. But I believe we have a responsibility to educate ourselves in the most effective ways to reach people. So I know a lot of people in your congregations, you may get pushback, you may get resistance to these ideas. But I always say, I challenge that resistance, and I say, how much more effective can we be if we practiced good stewardship through proper organization and planning? The Bible teaches us that a strong foundation is important. We should take this wisdom seriously. So when we talk about marketing best practices, when we talk about these ideas and being more strategic, it is a matter of good stewardship. It's a matter of investing money in a way that's lower cost but greater impact. And, like I always said, a wise person once said, don't pray for the things you can or should do yourself. Ask God to do the things only He can. If we set our minds to it, if we learn worth, I believe that God, the Holy Spirit, will bless us and magnify us. We won't go into the foundational principles just yet. There's a whole presentation, but again, for a sneak peek, you can check out that link. So I just want to say, if you guys don't have the book or you're curious about the book, you can get the book in print or digital format from Amazon or Advent Source. There are 2 links there. You can get it from Advent Source at sdadata.blog/book, or you can find it on Amazon, sdadata.blog/Amazon, or you can just search the title of the book and my name. I've only written 1 book. It should be easy to find.